Good evening. Welcome to the fourth lecture of the Forum on the Reflection of COVID-19 Pandemic. This forum is part of the Sunday evening lecture series organized by Dharma Master Jingyo at CTTB. I'm Raymond Ye, moderator of the series. I'd like to welcome the speaker of this evening, Professor Clair Brown at UC Berkeley, and our translator, Ms. Ihan Su. So we are very, very lucky to have both outstanding speaker and translator. And I will introduce them briefly. Dr. Clair Brown, a renowned professor of economics at UC Berkeley. He has published many aspects on inequality and sustainability. Her book recently, I don't know how recent, it's a few years, right? Buddhist Economics, an enlightened approach to dismal science, published by Bloomsbury Press, provide an economic framework that integrates global sustainability, shared prosperity, and care for the human spirit. And this holistic approach is based on actual national policies that reduce inequality, protect the environment, and share prosperity index for 50 countries. I have, I'm so impressed by the book from two aspects that from my own personal interest. First of all, I'm a Buddhist, so Buddhist economics, makes tremendous sense. Secondly, I've been introduced in transdisciplinary educational research for a number of years, and this intersection produced a great result because normally the intersection in the past have not produced such profound impact. So this is my own personal interest in today's talk. I'd like to also introduce our translator this evening, Ms. Su Yuan. She holds an MA in Performance Studies from the New York University.
Hello, Catherine.
Hello? Can you hear? Okay. Ms. Su holds an MA in Performance Art from the New York University Tisch School of Art, with a focus on avant-garde theater. Her fields of study include the intercultural and interdisciplinary performing arts studies. She also holds a BA in mass communication with a focus on radio and television production and newspaper and magazine publishing. An active volunteer in the Buddhist Text Translation Society since 2009. She has been participating in the weekly translation event in the Avatamsaka Sutra since 2011. And she is an instructor of the Dharma Ram Buddhist University since 2014. The title of this evening's talk and discussion is How COVID is helping us understand the meaning of life. Without the COVID, that's a big title anyway. And with the COVID, it's phenomenal. And Professor Brown will ask questions that, such as, how do we live meaningful life in a world out of balance with multiple crises, health, climate, inequality. And so without further ado, I will give let Professor Brown give, I think, a 20-minute presentation. Then we have some conversation and then Q&A with the audience. Professor Brown.
Thank you, Ray, for inviting me to participate. And thank you for joining us wherever you are. Whether you speak English or Chinese, I'm so delighted that you took time to come together and explore the question of how during this pandemic, is it changing our way of thinking about life and how to live a more meaningful life with awareness and compassion. Now, I know last week, many of you heard Nippon, who talked about uncertainty and also gave you inspiration, that telling you about all these wonderful things that people around the world are doing. And I was certainly inspired by it. But, you know, I'm an economist. And so I'm going to take a somewhat different approach, but it really complements what you heard last week with Nippon. So let me just share my screen and take you through a few things that I think are really important that to be asked today as we try to deal with the COVID in a way that helps us understand life better, but also helps us move ahead and how we want to live post-COVID. So let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Here we go.
Okay, so now I will put it on. I have to figure out how to get my screen now that fortunately, when I do that, it makes it very hard to actually make my computer go into the slideshow. Let me see what I can do. I'm gonna. Unfortunately, when I do this, it doesn't let me get. Well, I can't make it be the full screen. Can you see it okay anyway?
Lloyd, can you help?
Dr. Brown, you can click the icon and the button.
Well, if you can see it, the problem is when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see what you're seeing any longer. So what should we do? Is it okay to look at it this way?
Yeah, and you can also try to click on the slideshow button at the bottom.
Yeah, the problem is I can't get to that.
The very bottom of your screen.
Oh, my son.
Here we go.
You just came up and helped me. Thank you, Jason. Shout out to Jason. Okay, I needed my software engineer to help. So we're living, as you know, the problem is we're living in a time of multiple crises. And we already were living with the crisis from inequality and racial injustice. And we have the existential crisis of climate, the climate emergency. And now on top of that, we have the pandemic, which has totally altered our way of living. And then that's brought us the economic shutdown. So many people and I'm sure many of you are suffering not just from the pandemic and the economic shutdown, which we hope are short-term crises, but all of us are suffering from the climate crisis, racial inequality, and injustice. So in this time of multiple crisis, the way I think about it is that the world is out of balance. And that makes our lives out of balance. And so I think because of these crises and that have been going on for quite a while now, the climate crisis and the inequality crisis have gone on for decades, and racial injustice is like part of our life. So the point is that we really do need to step back and say, what's really happening? What can we do? So that's why I, in fact, wrote Buddhist Economics. I was out walking with my dog and one day, and I teach economics at UC Berkeley. And I was looking at my dog and said, we aren't teaching economics correctly. We don't focus nearly enough on inequality and the climate crisis. We really act like the world's doing just fine. What, he sort of looks at me with his doggy knowledge and says, well, how would Buddha teach economics? And I think, of course, that's the right question. How would Buddha teach economics? And of course, he would start off with the assuming that the world is interdependent, that we're all interdependent with each other and we're interdependent with nature. And here's Ingra's net, which I love because it reminds me all the time to remember that we all are reflecting each other in nature, and to remind me too that we're no healthier than nature is at the moment. And now we know the COVID's really taught us interdependence and that we're no healthier than the people around us. If one of us gets sick, then we'll all get sick. And then we also know about impermanence. And this brings us back to Nipun's talk about uncertainty. But impermanence is with us all the time. And actually, I think of impermanence once we can accept change. It's actually really quite lovely because every day we can get up and say, hey, it's a new day, it's a new beginning. I can actually do much better today because it's impermanent. Everything's changing. And I can forget about all of the things that I regret because it's a new day. And right now, I'm going to go forth and do better. So that to me is quite lovely. But the third part of Buddhist economics is probably equally important. It's that we live with compassion. We know that one of the things that's important to all of us is to help people that we know and the people we don't know when they're suffering. And so as Buddhists, we want to relieve suffering globally. And now today, we have the biggest opportunities to do that as we engage in this global pandemic and we watch people who need more food, people who need health care, people who are suffering and just need help. And even though we think, what can I do? Actually, each of us can do a lot in our own way. And that's one of the things I want to talk about tonight. So just to let you know, Buddha taught us about interdependence a long time ago, over 2,000 years ago, but it's now one of the laws of ecology. And Barry Commoner, who is a founder of modern ecology, which is really quite modern, he wrote his book in 1971 about the 4 laws of ecology. Everything is connected to everything else. There is one ecosystem for all living organisms, and what affects one affects all. Now, that certainly rings a bell with us because that's just a nice statement of interdependence. So, let me just tell you that the goal of Buddhist economics is to provide well being for all people in a sustainable world. So, we take the interdependence and we say, hey, everybody's well-being is interconnected. So we have to care about everyone's well-being. And our well-being is unified with nature. So we clearly have to take care of nature. But we go one step further as people who care about Buddhism or any other spiritual practice, in that we don't care just about body and mind, but we also care about the human spirit. It's got to be part of our way of thinking. And we also know, I hope all of us know, that our well-being is not determined by our consumption. That's like old school economics. Throw that out. But hey, consumption, no, that's not what makes you happy. And it's also not determined by outside events. Even though we like to be patted on the back and appreciated and promoted or celebrated or whatever is important to us in the real world, actually, that's not determines our full well-being. Our well-being really has to come from within, and our caring and our work with people in a meaningful way. So let's go back to this question, because I think it's really a central part of when we ask, what can we learn from COVID, and what's the lesson we can take forward? Let's remind ourselves what creates happiness. Because after all, we know all of us want to be happy. The question is, how do we achieve that? So we actually know from neuroscience now, thank you, neuroscientists, for letting us really understand this better, because we already felt intuitively that helping others makes us feel better, makes us happy. And we also know that interacting with the planet and caring for the earth makes us happy. So neuroscientists said, hey, helping others makes you happy. They did all these experiments with mind and how you image the mind. And so they found that. And they also have learned that taking walks, going outside, enjoying nature also makes you happy. Now, Aristotle taught this about the same, a little after Buddha, that he called it Eudonic happiness. And it comes from helping others, from good relationships. And he also emphasized contributing to the community. And for me, this is a really important lesson that we want to take forth from the pandemic period. So Buddhism, of course, talks about happiness coming from within and how grasping makes us suffer. So we know that attachment or grasping or trying to hold on to things will end up making us suffer. And that we know that if we can learn to let go of our grasping, if we can just let go of our ego, then we'll be much happier. And so at this point, I want to say appreciation to our translator. And all of you who are listening in Chinese, thank you for joining. So, especially during this season, the holiday season, I think it's really important to remind ourselves that even though we like to give gifts and we like to show our appreciation to other people, it's not really what makes them happy or makes us happy. And in fact, one of the things, for example, I started doing with my grandkids and my relatives and my neighbors even, is I said, let's quit giving little things to people that they actually probably don't even want. Let's make them things that we know they like. Like one of my friends is an amazing baker, so she brings around things she bakes. But some of us, well, I'm an economist and I don't have a lot of talents, okay? I just know economics. What the heck? But what I did was I went online and found the things that people cared about and made a donation to an organization that helps support nature or the climate crisis or animal care, whatever they cared about. And they all said to me, oh, what a great thing. I would much rather have this donation to something I care about as a gift. So thank you. And even my grandkids liked it because they said, well, we learned a lot about these new ways that we can help other people and help the planet. So during the holiday season, it's a good time to remember that consumption isn't what makes us happy, but in grasping makes us unhappy. And so one of the books I keep by my bed, and maybe you do too, is Shantideva's book, The Way of the Bodhisattva. And as you know, the Bodhisattva takes a vow to end suffering whenever she sees it, and that she won't she won't be, even if she's enlightened, she won't leave the earth as long as there's anyone suffering. And so that's a pretty tall order. But one of the passages in the Shanti that I find really powerful is, all the suffering there is in the world arises from wishing ourself to be happy. All the happiness there is in the world arises from wishing others to be happy. And that really summarizes what we've been saying so far. What makes you happy? Go help somebody. Go out and help heal the planet. And so therefore, let's move to the question of what can we learn during this period of the pandemic. And we're all scared about being sick. None of us wants to get sick, and we don't want any of our family or loved ones to be sick. But it's also a great time for reflection. While we're distancing at home, while our lives have become remote, as we are tonight, gathering remotely, it's a really good time to say, what is important to me? What makes my life meaningful? And I've watched my students at UC Berkeley. I'll say, can you take the time to just sit and contemplate and ask, what is important to me? And the minute we ask that, all of a sudden we realize that, hey, you know what? I spent so much of my time pre-COVID running around on taking care of all these things on my to-do list. I spent so much time doing it, just checking things off my list. Or I spent way too much time worrying about the future and checking things off my list that I had to worry about. But none of it, by the way, I never finished my to-do list. It never ended. Everyone tells me that, hey, I'm not about to be able to finish my to-do list. And I said, but then when I sit back and say, what's important to me, I realized that most of the stuff on my to-do list wasn't important. It didn't matter if I did it or not. It wasn't what was making life meaningful. Relationships made my life meaningful. Helping other people made my life meaningful. And also, I think during the pandemic is the right time that we all of a sudden realize every single day what we want to be grateful for. I know every day I sit back and say, I am so grateful that I have a nice place to live. I have a park where I can take my dog for a walk. I have good food that I can get and eat. I don't have to worry about how to survive shut up in my house. And then I really worry about all the people who've lost their jobs, who don't have adequate food for their families. They're worried about being evicted and becoming without shelter. There are people who lose their health insurance when they lose their jobs. And so all of a sudden, people are suffering in enormous ways, but not just in the US. They're suffering around the world. And so we want to be grateful for all we have, but it also raises the issue of what can we do to help others who are suffering if we aren't suffering as compared to others. I mean, even though I'm really bored at home and I really want to get out and see friends and students and have a bit more engaging life, actually my life is fine. I'm not suffering when I get down to what's important. And I even have more time to contemplate and talk to you. So when we ask about what creates a meaningful life, we want to come back to this whole idea of interdependence and remembering that we really don't want to treat others or nature as separate from ourselves. We really do have a good chance to stomp down our ego, know and see ourselves as totally interdependent with others and interconnected, and not think about ourselves as separate. So this, I think of the pandemic as a time that we actually do have time to care for others, but also to take action. And so I'm going to move on to this idea of taking action, because as an engaged Buddhist, it's our duty to relieve suffering. It is our duty to help heal the planet. It's our duty to do no harm and to help others do no harm. But really, as Buddhists, we want to heal the planet. So one of my mantras is based upon interdependence. A mantra that I say often during the day is, may we heal the earth as we heal ourselves. Because by taking care of the earth and really working hard to help the climate emergency and the climate crisis, we're actually healing ourselves. And we want to do that in a way that has an impact and has meaning. So if you can safely help your neighbors and community during this period, now's the time. I know that my husband and I go to our local farmers market in Richmond, California, every Friday. And I really wanted to buy more food from the farmers to help support them because they really needed a lot of help at this point. And I thought, but what am I going to do with all this food? You know, it's really, I can only eat so much. So I thought, oh, my husband and I buy a lot of food, and then we come home and we make little bags of produce, fresh produce, and drop it off at our neighbors. And our neighbors are so excited when we show up with fresh produce, and they say, oh, what do the farmers have today? And they say, we're eating so much better, thank you. And it's like this little thing, it's not that big a deal, and it makes at least 4 or 5 of our neighbors really happy, and it keeps them from having to go out and find fresh produce. So it's just little things, and that's where I say each of us, no matter who we are, actually knows ways that we're helping and caring for other people. And sometimes we don't even think about it that way. So sit back and think, you know, I am actually helping people. When I make a phone call to an elderly neighbor or to a family member, when I just send a short message or write a note, that's helping them. That's taking action that's helping them. And so when you think about what are you doing, you can also think, oh, I could do even more of this. And it's not like it has to change the world. All it has to do is help and reach out and give love and care. Because right now during the pandemic is a period where we desperately need love and care for each other. But you need to go one step further because of the climate emergency in which we've been killing the planet, and especially for the last 30 years, our use of fossil fuel has dramatically increased our killing the planet with overheating it through carbon emissions. And so what I hope you will also think about right now is when the pandemic is over and we can return to a more normal way of living, what organization can you take action with to help the world? And everybody has something that they can do. So a lot of people say to me, no, just a second. It's just me. It's just little old me. What can I do? And I said, actually, it's not just little old you. It's you and me and all the people around us. And hey, if it's just 10% of the world, that's a huge number of well-motivated, bright, smart people coming together with their different talents. So I learned that. I joined up quite a while ago now with 350 Bay Area, which we focus on eliminating fossil fuels in our economy. And what I learned quickly was, I'm an economist. Economist, what can I do? But what I learned is when I came into an organization that first of all, we had each other's back. We really helped each other. And so when Chevron started shouting at us, what do you know? It's like, you can't shut us down. Everybody loves gasoline and wants us to keep producing gasoline. Who cares if it's killing the planet? Well, they don't add that, but they're thinking that in some way. They're focused on their profitability and not on how they can actually help move to clean energy. So what I learned is that as an economist, I had certain aspects I could add. I could help add analysis and whatever. But then I was working with great lawyers and they brought what they could. I was working with these great health specialists. I was working with people who knew how to make signs so we could go to rallies. I was working with people who knew media and social media. Hey, they knew how to get on Instagram. I didn't, but they did. But together we would come together and this synergy is phenomenal. So just remember, all you need to do is have one thing you care about and think of that. I only have to affect one issue and then go join up with others who care about that issue. And you'll find that, in fact, the multitude of us, because we're all interdependent, can move forward together. So I think during the pandemic is a great time to ask, what do I really want to work on post-pandemic to help the planet and to help people? And then take action, because that's going to make your life feel much more meaningful, but also more hopeful, because we've got to use the pandemic as a time for change. We want to live mindfully. We want to live with compassion, with generosity, with wisdom. And together, we want to open our hearts and belong to each other and to the earth. And it will really change our lives. If we come out of the pandemic with new goals of making life more meaningful, but also helping each other and helping the planet, that will really make a huge difference. So our individual actions do matter. How we live does matter. But at this point in time, our collective actions could be even more important. And that's where the engaged Buddhism, for me, is a central part of my life. So let me just say that Thich Nhat Hanh says it really well. In his book, Love Letters to the Earth, our collective compassion, mindfulness, and concentration nourishes us, but it also can help us to reestablish the Earth's equilibrium and restore balance. Together, we can bring about real transformation for ourselves and for the world. But let me just say, as I bring this to a close, so I can have a chat with Ray and with you, please, that it's going to take courage. It takes a lot of courage. So having an organization to help you have the courage is really important. But every day, remember, you're saying, I'm not sure I can do this. Courage. We need courage to embrace and practice Buddhist economics because we need courage to change, courage to protect the environment, courage to promote justice, and perhaps most of all, we need courage to live with joy. So I invite you, please join me. Please, that together we need the political will and the courage to take actions now for people on the planet. And this isn't just a one-time idea of what am I going to do differently or how can I move forward and have the courage to do this. It's a lifetime commitment. It's a process. Some days we'll do better than others. But it's a process as long as a lifetime journey. And so I'm really happy to be here with you tonight and talk about how we can continue the journey together. So,
thank you so much.
So Ray, I'm so happy to have a chance to chat with you and to chat with our audience, because I'd love to hear about the ways they're thinking about making their lives meaningful and what have they learned from COVID that they can take forth.
Right, thank you. And it's such a wonderful talk, so smooth, so enhancing, and bring out our inner transcendence, so to speak, right, to the surface. Because, the world, especially, say, in the United States, we are so overwhelmed by our pursuit of quote unquote happiness. Not the kind of happiness you talk about.
Yeah.
But we are, most of us are pursuing consumption, self-satisfaction, and regardless what others, you point out, the traditional economic theory that's not taking into account of inequality, ecological preservation, and so forth. And now, for most of the audience this evening, I think there's no problem accepting Buddhist economics but how do we, you point out very straightforwardly that in order to get onto, to pursue real happiness is to care for each other, but we don't, right? The Maslow's hierarchy sort of talk about that a little bit, all right? If I'm in physiological need, I need to feed my stomach first. I don't care about anything else. So what you have said is, you have set an example of how you as a single person could affect not only yourself, but for example, you and Richard go to the farmer's market, bring back produce and distribute to your neighbors. That is a level of of increased happiness. And my question to you is that where and how we individually beginning to move in this direction for the bulk of the population. I mean, as a Buddhist, we all know that.
I think it's really important to work with organizations that demand these changes. As individuals, we can't really do much. But as organizations, we can do a lot. And we saw this in the last election where people came together and worked really hard to change the election, to get people out to vote. We didn't have the biggest turnout in voting just because all of a sudden everyone went to vote. There were actually a lot of organizations and people working together to help people register, to help people vote, to tell them how they could vote, could they vote by mail, to get them to the polls. And that's just one small example of the change that we have to demand. But for example, we have to come together and stand up against the big oil companies. We already know that Chevron, Shell, Exxon, they all, the last 30 years, hid their research and lied to us about the impact of using fossil fuel energy. And now we're in this situation where it's killing the earth, and it's also making all of us less healthy. And so we have to, come together and work with organizations that demand no more fossil fuel energy. And it's going to take a big movement to move us onto clean energy. Now, we're doing pretty well in California, although we still have a ways to go because we're still driving gasoline cars. And so we have a big problem in transportation. But what I've learned is I work in an organization called Green California, which brings together over 60 organizations working throughout the state to demand different aspects of making the economy a clean energy economy. And together we're making enormous progress, but each group can work on different things. And so what I've learned is that we can make a difference, Ray, but we have to work to do it. It's not going to happen by its own. American capitalism is not going to change it on its own. It's only going to change because we change it. And we can do that. There are a lot of groups out there, and I'm happy to help you find one if you want any help. Once you know, you just have to think about, what do I want to work on? You only have to have one thing you work on, because there are many of us together. Like tonight we have over 100 people, well-informed, smart people who can contribute to creating the economy and the society that we not only want, but we need desperately. And so we know the policies. My students at UC Berkeley created a Sustainable Shared Prosperity Policy Index to show the policies that create sustainability, share prosperity, get rid of inequality, care for the human spirit and human rights. And so this is not what the US is doing. Out of 50 countries, the US is number 36 on this index. We're doing awful. But all we need to do is look to Northern European countries, to European countries, France, Germany, even to the UK, to Australia, to Canada. They're doing much better than we are on creating well-being for their people in a way that makes their lives more meaningful. And we also, besides just saying that once we have enough to consume, then what else do we want in our lives? And we actually, I think, need to work less, for example. I love the idea of technological change and artificial intelligence causing a lot of tedious jobs to go away, because then let's say I'm not worried about people working less. I'm worried or being unemployed if we come together and say, you know what, we can keep the standard of living okay. We just all need to work less. And actually, Aristotle and Socrates, they all said, oh, once people have enough to eat and enough to live on, they'll reduce their work hours and have a more balanced life. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened because we're on this materialistic treadmill where we keep thinking, I need more and more and more. And that's where we need the courage to just stop, step back, and say, you know what? I have plenty to consume. I need more time with my family, with my friends. I need time to help my community. I need time to be politically active, to demand change. And so let's come together and do that. And I was hoping people might put some questions in chat or respond to us. But Ray, thank you. That was way too long an answer to your very, very lovely and insightful question.
Oh, this is beautiful. Let me chat. Well, so far there's no question.
Well, people are thinking, they're contemplating. They'll think of questions now.
Yeah, right. So in your analysis, I mean, if you look at the Northern European countries, right, they are providing an example of pretty much, not pretty much, but some of the things you have mentioned, right? The value for personal freedom, the value for personal to do what they want to do, and still can afford a reasonable living standard. I mean, that's the kind of thing that in the European, Northern European countries, it's easier to do because the population is smaller, I think. And no. Okay.
No, because Germany, France, they're all doing a much better job. One of the things they do is they don't put everything through the marketplace. One of the things they do is they have really important government services. And so they have good health care for people, they have good education, they have good child care for people. So they provide all of these government services that everyone should have. And then they also have a great social safety net. And that really came up with the pandemic. All of a sudden, people realized the US doesn't actually have a safety net that's automatic. And these other countries have a safety net. People stay in their jobs. The money goes to the employer to pay them their wages. They aren't laid off. People, if they do lose their jobs and are laid off, they immediately have an income support. They never lose health care. So it's like, and the kids stayed in school. So it's not like it's it's not like the US is doing any of that, to be honest. We need to really rethink the role of the government in our economy. And that's where the other countries, the other rich countries, are doing a much better job than we are. The government's much more active in the economy and should be. Because as we say, there's a saying in economics and political science, if the government isn't setting the rules of the economy, big business sets the rules. And that's certainly what we've been seeing in the US, especially over the last 4 years, but even longer than that. It's time for the government to play its correct role in the economy.
Well, what do you think of the role of education, right? In the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, most people in the United States are so overwhelmed by the pursuit for happiness. Different kinds of happiness, but and that part has to do with how they are brought up, right? Consumption and so forth. Now, how you think the Buddhist economics can be put into the educational system so that in the process of learning, they have acquired it in their, we are all interconnected. Well, that is not just saying it, but to practice it takes a lot of effort.
It takes courage. It absolutely does take courage. But, I believe in cultural evolution. And what we've learned is that biological evolution changes really slowly. But cultural evolution changes really quickly. And I think we saw that with Obama. What I saw, and I use my students a lot as a gauge of sort of what's happening out in the world. And my students under Obama, they became much more thoughtful about race. They were much more cognizant of racial inequality. They cared a whole lot more about inequality and what to do about it. And then Trump got elected, and all of a sudden, I saw this cultural evolution change, even on campus, where people got a bit more aggressive. They weren't nearly as nice to each other. They started acting like racial inequality wasn't that important to them. It was really disturbing to watch the culture, because cultural evolution can go either way. The culture can improve and become more mindful and meaningful, or it can go downhill and become much more selfish and aggressive. And I think that's what we've been seeing, Ray. But I don't see it as something that we can't change quickly under Biden. I think hopefully the pandemic is helping us realize the need for change, the need for caring for each other and loving each other again and being kind again. And so I think you're right. What we also do wrong in our economy is focus on more. We focus only on consumption. And I do think that other economies, and I'm working with many economists around the world, of how should we measure economic performance? And we all agree we don't want to measure it as consumption. That's not for rich countries. That's not the right way to measure it. We've got to downplay consumption and start talking about what makes life meaningful, what would really help people balance their lives, and what can support lives for people that would be meaningful to them. And so that's where we need to hear a lot more from people about what's meaningful.
That's wonderful. And this question from the audience asking whether the Buddhist economic can apply to organizations, like business organizations.
Well,
can you hear me?
Yeah, no. You're asking about. So what's really interesting is that we have, because of the climate crisis, before the pandemic, companies were starting to talk about the Business Roundtable even said, we've got to quit focusing just on profits. We have to focus on stakeholders. We have to focus on our workers, on our communities, and we especially have to focus on the environment. And that was a Business Roundtable, the 200 biggest companies in the world. But then the pandemic hit. So I've also been working with a group of business executives from Japan all the way through Europe. And they asked this question: how can we change our governance system so that we aren't just focused on shareholder profits? Because that's got to change. Our planet can't afford it, and we can't afford it as companies. And so we are starting to hear some companies talk about it. But to me, companies actually need the incentives from the government. I'm not going to wait for big business to solve the problems. I really want government to come in and do the regulations that we need to have, both to stop carbon emissions, both to stop the pollution, both to stop CEO pay being outrageously, morally high. We know that we could actually bring in taxes again that would tax companies and not allow them to overpay CEOs relative to their workers. There are lots of things that we could do. We know these policies because other countries do them, and we've studied them. It's just time to do it. So I think whenever companies are trying to do good, we should pat them on the back, say, good, go for it. We like that. But we also need the government regulations that say, hey, companies, this is what you need to be doing, and you have to do it now. And it takes care of their carbon emissions. It takes care of a lot of the inequality from excessive pay. We want health and safety to be enforced so that people in warehouses aren't dying from overwork as they bring us our goods that we ordered for Christmas. We've got to really make sure that people are cared for at work and that companies aren't basically making all the rules. And we also need, somebody mentioned in chat I saw, I think one of the biggest problems in the US right now is how wealthy companies and people are able to buy elections, so that we desperately need campaign finance reform. It's like, as long as people can buy elections and elect people to office, then they're going to turn around and of course do what they're told to do. And then also we see how the big money was able to buy the court system and elect people who, the Republicans who now, put really conservative people in the courts, but not just the Supreme Court, but throughout the federal judiciary system. So we've got to have campaign finance reform so that the wealthy companies and people aren't buying the government.
Well, another question from the chat is that in addition to the economy issue, during the pandemic, the mental illness skyrocketed more than 30%. How does that relate to your talk, so to speak?
I'm sorry, what skyrocketed 30%?
Mental illness.
Yeah, one of the things we learned, we've learned a lot from the COVID and what we've had to do. And one of the things we learned is it reminds us people are social creatures. And so all of a sudden, we had to, I don't think of it as socially distancing. I just think of it as isolation. We all of a sudden had to be at home. We all of a sudden couldn't hug people. We all of a sudden, when people got sick, instead of going to help take care of them and physically caring for them, we had to stay away from them. And we watched elders die alone, which is a terrible way to leave the earth. And so we also saw that our kids, once we isolated them home and thought they were going to learn on a Zoom box, it's like, what? I mean, of course, all of a sudden we realized how important social relations are. And social relations are a huge part of our well-being. And so without the social relations and the daily interaction exchanges and caring for each other up close and personal, people did start having mental reactions that have been really hard on them. Depression, and I mean, I don't know about you, but I also at times, right, I just want to go out and hug some friends. I want to go see my students and watch them blossom in front of me. And I want to have interaction because the personal interaction is really different than talking to you on Zoom. I'm so sorry I'm only having to talk to you on Zoom. It's like, oh, and I think that the more that we can do things to not have social isolation, the better it is. I think that, like the Europeans, for example, they didn't shut their schools down. They said, we're going to keep our schools open no matter what, and found ways to do that. And New York's trying to get back to school too, because they realized how important it was for the kids to be in school and to be with each other. And I think it's also really important that we find a way to especially nourish our elders and not keep them shut up somewhere just so they're physically healthy. We have to remember mental health really matters. And so I think we didn't think nearly enough about that. I think we've been way too much focused on physical health, which of course is important, but that mental health is also really important. So I'm grateful to Alan Huang for bringing that up. Thank you.
Well, this is related to what we mentioned earlier about I was talking about Maslow's hierarchy, right? And we can, to be happy in the sense you talk about, we have to jump several levels, right? From the physical need to mental need to eventually self-actualization, so to speak. Not in the Buddha sense, but that's for the normal, so there's an inner transition, that the transcendence that each of us needs to perform in order to impact the outside environment.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. That's actually one of the things I mean by asking. During this period of the pandemic, I got to learn a lot about myself that I had never really thought about before. And that's what I meant. Time to ask was, to be honest, I didn't, I hate to admit this, but some days, some weeks I'd say, oh man, I don't feel like having to go to campus and teach that class today. I'm so sick of having to go in and teach sometimes. And now that I can't go in and teach in person, I can't tell you how much I miss my students. It's astonishing. I'm thinking, I had no idea how important it was that I saw my students and could relate to them as people. And my students are all struggling. And I talk to them individually, but it's only by phone or by Zoom. They talk about how hard it is for them to be isolated and not to be around the energy of the campus, but also the intellectual life is not nearly as powerful. And so it's like, I learned that about myself. I learned a lot of other things about myself too, about what was meaningful. And I did learn that my to-do list in the future is going to be teeny. I'm really going to say, okay, what's really important right now for me? What do I really care about right now? I might let it be a couple of things, but you know what? I'm just going to let it go until it's time for it. Because we do let modern life overwhelm us, I think, about all the things we should be doing. And I am starting to ask much more, what do I want to be doing? Not what should I be doing? This constant knock on us, right? And we already know we don't want to regret the things that we haven't done, and we don't want to worry about what we haven't done. We want to live much more in the moment and the making life right now meaningful. But I think the pandemic's really helping me to learn that in a much sort of important way. And I hope it's doing that for others too.
Well, it has done for me and Priscilla that because of the once the pandemic hit, CTTP has a very rigorous rule in terms of if you go out a little bit, you come back 2 weeks, you know, in your cottage or room. Unfortunately, we have a younger daughter who lives about 10 miles away and who is not in good health, you know, so we have to visit her from time to time, you know. So during the last 8 or 9 months, we practically just stay here. We have one room, which is our Buddha hall, our dining room, our study, our living room, all combined. And we were thinking that we would be not be able to adjust to this. Now, after 9 months, we're perfect, we're fine. And so I get to, as you put it, I got to know a lot more about myself. All right, you know, I'm over 80, so take a flashback look at the last 80 years. There's a lot of stuff that I still have a chance to clean up.
Right. So what I hear you saying, Ray, too, are all the things you're grateful for. I mean,
Exactly.
Period of enormous gratitude. And I see that someone asked about what do we do about the 70 million people who voted for Trump and how to reach out to them. And I think that's a really important question, especially for people with a spiritual practice, where I think it really helps that we don't think of them as other and us, because that really does help us relate to them as people. And one of the things that I find, so I must tell you, I grew up in Tampa, Florida. Hey, a lot of the people I know in Tampa are Trump supporters. I'm pretty sure relatives of mine are Trump supporters. But we don't talk about, are you a Trump supporter or not? I actually, when we talk about how's your life going? What do you need in your life? And I got to tell you, I probably harp too much on climate, but I see it as an existential crisis that we absolutely have to take action on immediately. And so I talk to them about climate, and they often don't know climate at all. But what I've found out, and especially for the Trump supporters, what I find out is when I start talking about climate, they're actually really interested because they do care about what the future will be like for their kids or grandkids. They do care about extreme weather. They've all suffered from extreme weather already down in Florida. They see sea level rising. So what I've learned is that if I can talk about things that are important to me, that are also important to them in terms of policies, that we actually can agree on policies. And a lot of the surveys that the Pew Institute or Data for Progress have done on policies, they find out actually a lot of us, like 70-80% of Americans agree on policies for stopping the climate crisis, for reducing inequality. And so I don't talk about, are you for Biden or Trump? I talk about, what do we need in this country right now to improve people's well-being and to improve the lives that we all want to live? Because, it's amazing how we all actually do care about the same things and about how to come together and to actually care for each other, but also the planet. And so I find that's really the only way that we can reach out and unite with other people.
That's wonderful. Let's see. I see. Well, here's saying I agree with Dr. Brown. Once when you talk about the other side, you've already divided our nation. Well, we don't regard people, the 70 million people, as the other side, but
Well, it probably helps that I grew up in a really conservative area, so that as Arlie Hochschild's book tells us, the people in the South, they're actually very nice and meaningful people, and they do want to do good. It's just they've been sort of taught a different worldview. And so I think that when we think about these other people is, hey, they're just humans too, just like I am, and we're all interrelated, we're all interconnected. Let's see how we can find common ground to move forward. And so I really appreciate people's comments on this. And Suzanne, thank you for your comments. They've been great. Like,
Thank you. Well, what's the best way to cope with this time of uncertainty? That's the question.
Deepan didn't answer that. I thought Deepan answered it well. I think we have to realize that we're always living in a time of uncertainty. One of the things I love about Buddhism is impermanence. It's like things are always changing. Now, this time of uncertainty has, as Nippon pointed out, the problem is the uncertainty is especially negative. And often the uncertainty can be positive or negative. It's just times are changing, they're dynamic. But now we're living in a period where the uncertainty is especially negative. And so let me just say that for me, living in this time of uncertainty is to make sure that I'm safe and the people around me are safe. And I do everything I can to help everyone I see be safe in terms of staying well. But that, let me just go back and say that it's really a wonderful time to just stop. We have to stop. We've stopped, and then get to really use the time to explore, who are we? Post-pandemic, what can we do to improve our lives so that we're feeling better about the way we're living, about our contribution? If we've been too focused on consumption, how can we actually change that so that we realize that consumption and more income is not really going to make us happy? And Ray talks about the free market way of happiness, which I write about in my book. It's called hedonic happiness. And economists are great on hedonic happiness. Hedonic happiness is pleasure at the moment. How can I feel a big bump in pleasure just for a moment? Or how can I avoid pain right now? But all the studies have shown that, in fact, this bump in pleasure from buying a car even goes away really fast. And you revert back to your old level of unhappiness or happiness. And then, in fact, often after you buy something and it gave you a big bump of pleasure, then you actually get dissatisfied and you think, oh, did I buy the right car? Oh, what car does my neighbor have? Oh, how do I compare? And so you get into these invidious comparisons. So you take conspicuous consumption, invidious comparisons, and that gives you hedonic happiness. But as Buddha taught us, it makes you suffer because you're grasping. It makes this attachment end up with suffering. And so hedonic happiness usually ends up with suffering.
Right. That's what people experience anyway, in the pursuit of that kind of happiness.
Yeah, really. It's not lasting happiness. It's not true happiness.
Right.
True
right.
satisfaction. Yeah.
And here's another question. Given the state of the world that it is right now, how long do you think, if humans haven't changed their ways about climate change, the Earth has still life until force apart?
Yeah, well, the IPCC is starting to make it real clear that we absolutely need to reduce carbon emissions by half by 2030. I mean, they're giving us goals, they're telling us what to do. And one of the reasons that the carbon emissions are so dangerous is carbon dioxide lasts in the atmosphere for up to 2 centuries. So we have this natural regenerative cycle where carbon's absorbed in the soil and the trees and the water. But when you put too much in the atmosphere, it's not absorbed. and some of it's radiated back out. So you have this natural regeneration, but we've overwhelmed that. And so the IPCC is real clear about what we need to do. And they're also very clear about how we're not doing it at the current time. But a lot of that, to be honest, is the fault of our own country. And so I see it as our responsibility in the United States to immediately start reducing carbon emissions, to demand it. That Biden has said it's an our number one existential crisis. We absolutely must do something about it. We'll rejoin the Paris Agreement. We have to become world leaders again. And we can, because we have the technology, we have the roadmaps. Stanford University has set out roadmaps about how to go to completely clean energy across all countries, and what it would look like. So we know how to do it. We just have to act. To be honest, after working on ending fossil fuels in California, I realized one of the biggest problems is big oil. They fight like crazy against anything. I mean, I am so used now to standing up and giving out. I'm a professor, so I stick to facts. I present arguments. And they just get up and spout lies. And they say, but everybody needs to use our oil and gasoline. They absolutely demand it. So we're only giving people what they want. It's like, yeah, people want to kill the planet. No, I don't think so. But we have to just stand up to big oil. We know the path, we know the way, and we can make it happen. But it's not gonna be easy to create the change we need, because as you point out, it's gotta happen quite rapidly. But it can. We know it can, and other countries are moving ahead much faster than we are, but we can catch up.
Wonderful. Now, going back to the educational issue, you have brought this into the classroom. From the classroom, you're teaching your students gradually to, propagate the message. And so that when they become legislators and so forth, they will make things happen, right? And so the educational component I want to bring back again. This caring, I think we need two things. One is caring for each other, caring for the environment, caring. This thing has to be sort of learned from the very beginning. It's the other thing is, I think in the conversation, talk about, in order to have that heart, the big heart, so to speak, to seek for the real happiness rather than the ordinary happiness. And we need inner transcendence.
I'm sorry, we need what?
Inner transcendence. All right. Whether you do it through meditation or through other means, through ecological concern, it doesn't matter. All right. These needs to be put into the early curriculum of the schools, because
right. Yeah, right, like the emotional intelligence curriculum.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think, Ray, I believe that people are naturally compassionate and kind. We can also be egotistical and selfish, but that people, I believe in sort of the Buddhist way of thinking that people are babies are born kind and naturally caring. And then society comes in and says, oh, you have to care about your money and your job and your power and your sexual attraction and whatever else. So we're taught, oh, here are all the things that you should be caring about. And so sort of your natural kindness and compassion can get clouded over. And so what I hear you saying is, in schools, we have to bring that back to kids and say, actually, you really do want to be kind and compassionate, caring, because that makes us all much happier in the classroom and life at home. And kids are reminded of that. But I think they're only reminded because they were already that way. What I like to think about is not just teaching them that, but teaching them about how well-being depends upon not consumption. Everybody needs a certain amount of consumption and good food and a place to live, healthcare, education. We need the basics. But then we also need to have sort of our talents supported. And to use Amartya Sen's saying, we want our full opportunities to develop. We want to have full development of who we are. So then we can use, we all have different talents, which is wonderful. I love that. And we want to be able to use our talents, our skills, our education to make the world a better place, to come back together. And I think that's so important that we allow each person in their own way to develop who they are, what they want to do, how they can do it, but that they really do want to use their skills and talents to contribute to the world. Or as we say, you're happy from what you contribute to your community.
Absolutely. Well, I think our time is up, and I have a few more questions to ask, but maybe we'll do it in private.
I just want to thank people. I really appreciate your being here. And it gives me great optimism and great hope that when this many people can gather around and care about the world, the planet, their lives, and what they can help do to help other people in the planet, then I have real hope, because I know that together we can create the change we want. And I'm so grateful that we're all joining together, even when it's from afar and it's only virtual, but we're joined together in the process of creating the world that we want and we need. And so I thank you. I thank you so much for all you're doing.
Well, thank you, Claire, and for giving us such an inspiring talk and sharing your insights about how to change the world. And it's our honor to have you to share your insight with our community, and also our great translator, Sui Yuan. You know that doing this simultaneous translation is very, very hard. I know I cannot do it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you. And I want to just announce that next week is our last lecture by Professor John Wu. His title is The Future of Education, which fit into our talk tonight. Thank you very much. Amitofo.
So usually we will dedicate Mary at the end. So we will all chant us together in English. I think Ellen will lead us to chant us. Ellen, you can start anytime.
Okay, let's start. May the Mary from this practice adorn all the Buddha's lands, repay the kindness from above, and rescue those in paths below. May all who see or hear all this resolve upon awakening, and when this body meets its end, be born together in the land of bliss.
Your next 3 head bows. In respect to the Venerable Master, thank you, Dr. Brown, and thank you, Ray, and everybody.
Thank you.